Week 2 of fantasy football is here, and it is time for you to set those IDP lineups. But do not fear, we've got the top 12 rankings for each of the IDP positions coming up right after this. Welcome back to the IDP Plus podcast. It is time to gear up for week 2 of fantasy football in those IDP leagues. I'm your host, Axton Harding, and on this segment of the show, we cover rankings week in and week out throughout the fantasy season to bring you the top 12 players for any given week at the defensive line, linebacker, and defensive back positions. So you can find me on Twitter at AxemanIDP. Feel free to shoot me a DM, tag me in something, ask for an opinion. If you're just looking for somebody else's thoughts on something, I'm always willing to lend my opinion for whatever that's worth. So if you like what you hear, feel free to drop me some questions in the comments. Hit me up on Twitter again. That's AxemanIDP. I'm not going to go ahead and self-promote any more than that. So let's go ahead and jump into these rankings, shall we? So we're going to start off with defensive linemen, linebackers, and then go to defensive backs. We're going to start at the front of the defense and move our way to the back there. So here, to start it off, we've got 1 through 12, TJ Watt, Brian Burns, Jared Verse, Max Crosby, Myles Garrett, Josh Hines Allen, Micah Parsons, Nick Benito, Alex Highsmith, Nick Bosa, and Byron Young. And also Harold Landry rounds out the top 12. So let's jump into some of these guys here at the top. TJ Watt has a home game against Seattle this week. They gave up 6 solo tackles and a strip sack and a quarterback hit to Nick Bosa last week on his way to a top 5 defensive lineman performance. So I think that this Seattle Seahawks offensive line is very vulnerable. They were one of the most vulnerable last season as it relates to sacks given up over the course of the season. They performed okay against the San Francisco pass rush, but this pass rush and defense isn't quite what it once was. They're dealing with a new guy in the second layer of the defense in D. Winters, who's performed really well. But in terms of pass rush, they lost Trayvon Hargrave. They don't quite have the kind of front that they used to have. It's really just Nick Bosa coming off the edge there. So the fact that he was able to land a strip sack and have himself a nice top 5 defensive lineman day bodes well for TJ Watt coming in for week 2. I actually think there's going to be a little bit more meat on the bone. We'll get into that with Alex Highsmith also here in the top 10 in just a bit. But I think TJ Watt kind of had a slow start to the season last week in week 1. But nonetheless, I think this is a good week for TJ Watt to kind of make, put himself on the map for the season and kind of hang out, go ahead and get that top end performance already here in week 2. So I like this matchup here against Seattle for TJ Watt. That's why I've got him at my number 1 for this week. Let's see. Now we've got, is that right? Yep, Brian Burns here, number 2. Goes up against the Dallas Cowboys this week. I think this is kind of a sneaky matchup here for Brian Burns. The Dallas Cowboys played Philadelphia last week. Philadelphia's pass rush is pretty inexperienced, not to mention the very first play of the game, they lost one of their best pass rushers from the interior of that defensive line in Jalen Carter. Now they've got Jalex Hunt and Nolan Smith, 2 guys who've never played a full-time role outside of maybe the playoffs last season, which they did perform well, but we're also now jumping into an entire season for them at that position, where the team kind of already had momentum going into playoff contention. Last year, I think that they kind of got put a little bit back down this year so far. The Chiefs have historically been pretty vulnerable, and I don't think that they had their way in terms of the defensive line with the who was it? The Cowboys. They played Philadelphia. They didn't really have their way with Dak Prescott last week. Excuse me, I was thinking Chiefs for a second. The Philadelphia pass rush really didn't do much against the Dallas Cowboys. They were able to kind of focus on the edge and didn't really have to worry about the interior defensive line, so their game plan kind of shifted. So I think that maybe there might be a little bit more meat on the bone for more experienced pass rush to take advantage of what is a little bit weaker offensive line for the Dallas Cowboys from what we've seen historically at least. So Brian Burns came off strong in week 1 with 2 sacks in his first week of play. And this New York Giants defensive line is one of the most fierce pass rushers in the league pretty easily. So I think I think there's plenty of talent here in this defensive line for the New York Giants, and I think it's going to open up some opportunities for Brian Burns to get back there, and Dallas is going to throw the ball a ton. Dak could very well throw the ball 40 or more times, which is going to give Brian Burns plenty of opportunity and pass rush, chances to land a sack here with all the pass rush opportunities. So Burns was able to take down Jaden Daniels twice in week 1, as I mentioned, but I think Dak is going to be a little bit easier target to bring down. It's not going to be as slippery. He's not really going to leave the pocket too much. So I think it's going to leave Brian Burns pretty capable to get back there and maybe land one this week. So I think I like that for I like Brian Burns this week up against the Dallas Cowboys. And Javonte Williams was actually surprisingly good. They ran the ball through him a decent amount. So Brian Burns is a tackle floor kind of guy. I think he's going to be a top-end performer again this week. So I think he's going to believe he should have himself a healthy fantasy output this week. Jared Verse here at number 3. Plays the Tennessee Titans this week. If you were paying attention to last week's matchup, rookie Cam Ward ate about 5 or 6 sacks from the Denver Broncos pass rush. I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity here for Jared Verse. Week 1 didn't quite pan out for my man Verse in what was projected to be a pretty great matchup, but Byron Young off the other side of the edge of the defensive line hit home for the sack there. But that could be something that kind of happens throughout the year where these guys just kind of go back and forth. Byron Young is no slouch. Of course, he made the top 12 this week because this is an even better matchup than what we saw last week. And Jared Verse, although it didn't really show up in the box score, Jared Verse did perform pretty well, where he still graded at a 90 grade overall, which was 6th among edge rushers, and generated 4 pressures last week, which was still pretty respectable. So he's due to land one of those anytime now. So again, the Tennessee offensive line is just atrocious. 6 sacks last week, and like 5 or 6 different guys land one. So I don't think anybody from Denver's pass rush had more than 1 sack. So it was all different guys, and they were just kind of leaking all over the offensive line. So this ought to be a great matchup. Jared Verse having already had 4 pressures. The league lead was about 8 or 9. So he's still got a little room to work there, but nonetheless, he was still generating pressure on quarterbacks. You give Jared Verse a few more opportunities, and I think he's going to land at least 1 this week against a pretty porous offensive line and an inexperienced quarterback who's likely going to hold on to the ball a little bit. So like Jared Verse this week against the Tennessee Titans. Then we got Max Crosby against the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers actually threw the ball quite a bit against the Chiefs in week 1. 34 or more times Justin Herbert threw the ball. I can't remember exactly. For some reason that number sticks in my head, but I know it was a hefty amount, a lot more than I was expecting, because all offseason and all of last year we were seeing run heavy. Then boom, Justin Herbert comes out and launches like 35 to 40 balls. So I think that's just going to lend well to pass rush opportunity for Max Crosby. So I think that Drew Tranquill was able to get a couple of sacks last week. And I know we're talking linebackers, defensive ends, but they weren't necessarily surprise blitz opportunities. So and he historically comes off the edge whenever he does blitz anyways. So maybe there might be some opportunity here for Max Crosby. I know the offensive line, as a result of that, is going to be pretty vulnerable. So Max Crosby, if anybody's going to get back to rush that passer and land a sack, Max Crosby would be my best bet here for this defensive line for the Vegas Raiders. The only caveat with this is that Joe Alt was pretty superb in pass protection against Chris Jones. So if Max Crosby lines up opposite him, it might be a little tough. But nonetheless, he's a young guy. There's still some opportunity here. Karlaftis even landed a sack last week, so there should be chances for Max Crosby to get back there to Justin Herbert and land one. And he's the guy who's going to bring a hefty floor of tackles. So the Chargers are going to run the ball a decent amount too. It's a successful offense. They push the ball down the field, which gives the opportunity for more rushes, more pass rush opportunities. So there's tackles and big plays. So there should be plenty of football played this Sunday in the Vegas Raiders and Chargers game. So I expect Max Crosby to have a pretty nice performance. Next on the list, we've got Myles Garrett. Let's see where exactly. Number 5 against the Baltimore Ravens this week. Lamar can be a pretty slippery quarterback, and the opportunities can be limited at times when the Ravens have the run game humming. But Cleveland will have to plug Derrick Henry. I imagine that Myles Garrett could be there to soak up a few of those tackles. He's going to be one of the few guys that are big enough to even take him down, for that matter. So, but nonetheless, I know Lamar. I just said Lamar's a little slippery, but he's a guy who moves around a lot in the pocket and does allow for some sneaky sack opportunities when his offensive line just flat out doesn't know where he is. So he is a guy who will go down and be susceptible to some pass rush sack opportunities. And Myles Garrett, after coming off a 2-sack week against the Joe Burrow's Cincinnati Bengals, I think that he's going to want to set the tone here for this Cleveland-Baltimore game and also let Lamar Jackson know kind of who's in charge here. So Myles Garrett isn't historically a tackle producer, but last week he did manage to garner 5 solo tackles. So that's encouraging for a guy like Myles Garrett, because if he can bring a consistent tackle floor to his game week in and week out, we're looking at a guy who could easily finish at 1 overall in multiple weeks in all of IDP. So that's my case there for Myles Garrett against the Baltimore Ravens. Now we get a little spicy where we've got Josh Hines-Allen coming out of the shadows at number 6 going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. It is time, folks. The elusive Josh Allen makes the top 12 against a vulnerable Cincinnati Bengals offensive line who let Myles Garrett scrap for 2 sacks against Joe Burrow a week ago. Josh Hines-Allen's had a slow start to the season, but if you've been around here before, you know how I feel about Josh Allen. He's a guy who's going to pretty well ghost you for much of the season, about 80% of the season, and he's going to gobble up all of his points in a select handful of games. This is one of those games where Josh Hines-Allen should have plenty of chances to get back there and sack Joe Burrow. He could have himself a monster game, much like we saw Myles Garrett last week. He is capable of that. Yes, he's going to have much of the season. He's going to fall off and pretty well be 1 or 2 tackle guy and not really put up many fantasy points for you, but this is a good week for him to do that. Cincinnati's offensive line is pretty poor. They didn't do much to improve it. They've been paying all their studs even more money than what they had previously instead of paying and filling out the positions that they need. So nonetheless, offense is going to be on the field a ton. Josh Hines-Allen is going to have plenty of opportunity to get back there and sack Joe Burrow, and I imagine he lands one this week. Now we've got Michael Parsons at number 7 against the Washington Commanders. Parsons snagged a sack on just 30 snaps last week in his Green Bay debut against the Detroit offensive line, which was the Detroit offensive line is among the top in the league. It's at least top half. So the fact that he was able to get back there and sack the quarterback on limited opportunity last week in his very first week with hardly any practice, hardly knows the scheme. I imagine he probably was just told what kind of pass rush play, or what his role was on any given play. Hey, you do this here, you do that there. And so the fact that he was able to even land a sack last week against a tough offensive line lends well to this week, because Jaden Daniels is one of those guys who is pretty susceptible to big plays for opposing defensive lines. Last year, he was among the top 5 most sacked quarterbacks in the NFL. Last week, he ate 3 sacks, so I think Micah Parsons, with some more pass rush opportunities, more familiarity with the scheme and his teammates and that chemistry there. I'm not saying already in a week he's just got vast chemistry, but it's more than it was last week, and he was already able to land one against a tough offensive line. Give him a week 1, and I think with a week of familiarity in the system, I think Michael Parsons could pretty handily land one here against the Washington Commanders. This should be a pretty good game. I'm excited to see this one. It should be a back-and-forth affair. Green Bay is really bolstered now their defensive line by giving up those 2 first-round picks there for Michael Parsons. So I'm excited to see him perform, and I think there's a good opportunity for him to land one against rookie or second-year quarterback Jaden Daniels. Now we've got Nick Benito here. What is he, number 8? Number 8. Nick Benito against the Indianapolis Colts. Denver goes to Indy, and surprisingly enough, Daniel Jones is actually making the Colts an offense that can stay on the field, and that bodes well for snap opportunities. The more snaps you're on the field, the more chances you get for pass rush, more chances you get for tackles, big plays. So we want good matchups where the offense isn't just going to go 3 and out every time, and you're only going to get about 40 snaps from your defensive players. that leaves limited opportunity. We want big opportunity. And Indianapolis is actually looking like a competent team under Daniel Jones. They've got a pretty good offensive line, so that's going to help them push the ball down the field. But nonetheless, whenever you've got premier pass rushers, a top-end offensive line can only do so much. And this Denver pass rush is one of the top in the league, if not the top pass rush in the league. It just helps Nick Benito that he's got an awesome interior defensive line and an awesome edge rusher across from him and Jonathan Cooper to take attention off of him, because he's not just flat out they're all excellent pass rush performers, graders. I mean, so who do you hone in on? There's not really one guy that you can hone in on. So Nick Benito is often a guy who ends up landing one, can have himself a heck of a day. He's one of those big play guys that actually ended up being pretty consistent throughout the course of the last couple of years. So, again, Benito ought to get plenty of opportunity this week. But last week, on just 21 pass rush snaps, he was able to put up an insane 28.6 pressure rate, 28.6% pressure rate. So he was pressuring the quarterback on 28% of his snaps, which is insane. That's double the average of about your average or your elite pass rusher. So the fact that he had limited opportunity last week, still converted at a high rate in terms of pressure rate, landed a sack. That's again, it just bodes well for a maybe a little bit better opportunity this week, where Indy is going to be able to push the ball downfield. Daniel Jones is going to throw the ball 30 or 40 times, and I think Nick Benito is going to be. They're going to put a lot of pressure on Daniel Jones and try to keep him busy and moving. Just not able to kind of see plays develop. That's what makes Denver's pass rush so effective, is that they're always putting pressure on the quarterback and not really letting them just kind of get comfortable in the pocket. So Nick Benito, I think he should have more like 50 to 60 plus snaps this week, which is going to give him about 15 to 25 more opportunities to land a sack. So Daniel Jones did go down last week, so I imagine Nick Benito should be in a good position to kind of make some big plays this week for Denver. Now we've got Alex Highsmith at number 9 against the Seattle Seahawks. Kind of one of those boom-bust guys, but has somewhat developed himself a tackle floor over the last year. Again, he plays Seattle this week, and Seattle has among the league's worst offensive lines. It held up okay last week against a mediocre pass rush. I mentioned that earlier when I was talking about T.J. Watt. But again, the San Francisco pass rush isn't where they used to be, and nonetheless, Nick Bosa had a top 4 performance. So there should be room for a truly dominant pass rush like the Pittsburgh Steelers to take advantage of a suspect offensive line. And I think there's going to be enough meat on the bone here for Watt and Highsmith to both land one home and have some pretty big days, because I think Seattle didn't do a whole lot to improve their offensive line. I think this is going to be a prime opportunity for these edge rushers to really hit the stat sheet in a big way, I guess, this week, because they didn't really get off to. I guess Highsmith had himself a pretty good day, a pretty good week last week, making himself a top 10 performance. But I think this is a good week where T.J. Watt probably takes over, and there's probably still enough for Alex Highsmith to eat as well. So love this matchup here for both Pittsburgh pass rushers against the Seattle Seahawks offensive line this week. Now we've got Nick Bosa. Talked about him off the top. Playing in New Orleans Saints is a little bit of a tougher matchup, but he's coming off a nice week where he, as I mentioned earlier, where he grabbed himself 6 tackles and a strip sack. Now he plays a high-volume pass offense in the Saints. The Saints' offensive line is actually somewhat stout, but nonetheless, they have an inexperienced quarterback back there. And I think a guy like Nick Bosa could pretty easily take advantage of one missed opportunity by an offensive line, get back there and sack the quarterback. Because Spencer Rattler threw the ball 46 times last week. That's insane. That's a lot of pass rush opportunity for opposing defensive lines. And offensive lines can be great, but at the same time, that's a lot of chances for them to mess up. And I think Nick Bosa is one of the best at taking advantage of those opportunities. So I think he builds on that strong Week 1 performance in Week 2. Now we've got Byron Young here at number 11. Almost done with these defensive linemen. Byron Young plays the Tennessee Titans. Yeah, we've got 2 Rams edge rushers here in the top 12. Again, I mentioned earlier, this matchup is just too tasty not to take advantage of. If Byron Young is going to be the guy that landed the sack last week, I think there's going to be plenty for him to kind of feast on this week, as the Denver pass rush landed 6 sacks, as I mentioned earlier, last week against Cam Ward in week 1. He's a welcome to the league kind of game there. So I think that the Rams pass rush is just a notch down probably from Denver. They've got a strong defensive front, and I think there's going to be a lot of chances for Byron Young and Jared Verse to both get back there and mess with Cameron Ward's head. I think he's going to be Cameron Ward's got a couple of tough pass rush matchups to kind of face in his first couple of games in the NFL. Byron Young ought to continue off that performance. He's got a high tackle floor. He always kind of has. So he really brings that to the table. If he wasn't going to be top 12, he was going to be probably a DL2 anyways. But now you give him a great matchup. He's already been a top 10 performer. I like Byron Young and Jared Verse this week against a weak Tennessee offensive line. Byron Young also excels in PFF pass rush metrics. So he's one of the more like 89, 90 kind of graded defensive ends, edge rushers. So, no less. Last week was no fluke. I think that he's going to have a great chance to continue off of that performance. Now we've got Harold Landry. Harold Landry III against the Miami Dolphins this week. I'm sure you all know Harold Landry put himself, a top 5 overall performance for IDP last week. Now he faces the Miami Dolphins offense, who gave up 3 sacks on Tua last week. 2 of them were from defensive backs via the blitz, so might be a little bit of a caveat there, but nonetheless, I think that there's going to be opportunity for a pretty weak Miami offensive line, who hasn't done much to really help it. The team really hasn't addressed it, at least in the offseason. So, the fact that they are susceptible to so many sacks, it's kind of how do I want to say, it makes you wonder why, if your offense hinges so much on your quarterback, why haven't you done near enough to protect him? Oh, you're sending him to jiu-jitsu classes to avoid being hit or learn how to land right. It's not entirely him. Protect the man. He's the guy you're paying to run the offense. Why aren't you protecting him? They haven't done anything to address the offensive line. Took 3 sacks last week. I think Harold Landry haven't gone scorched earth for his new team. Old coach, new team, and Mike Vrabel. So I think building off a 2.5 sack performance last week, I'm not going to call for 2.5 sacks this week, but it's a good opportunity for him to build on that performance. And again, he's a guy who also brings a hefty tackle floor. Historically, he's more of a better run stuffer than he is a pass rusher, but this is encouraging stuff. He played a hefty amount of snaps as well, so he's going to be on the field plenty. He also leads the league right now in pressures with 8 in the first week. He was a very, very efficient in converting those into sacks. That's really great for a guy who's not really been a great pass rusher. The fact that he had a high conversion rate last week is encouraging for Harold Landry going forward. So if you've been around, I've been a fan of Harold Landry all offseason. I think he's been an undervalued defensive lineman, so I think he still remains in the top 12 this week with his week 2 performance. So let's get into some linebackers. Top 12 linebackers, we've got number 1, Foye Oluokun, Zaire Franklin at 2, Ernest Jones at 3, Jamin Sherwood at 4, Roquan Smith at 5, Henley at 6, Quay Walker at 7, Jordan Brooks at 8, Alex Singleton at 9, Zach Bond at 10, Edgerrin Cooper at 11, and Tyrell Dodson at 12. Going back up to the top, we've got Foye Oluokun against the Cincinnati Bengals this week. Foye is back. I've been on him all offseason. He's been faded, and instead of going in the first round of any of all IDP drafts, you've been able to get him in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round if things fall right. So Foye, boom, 10 tackles, an interception, pass deflection last week, and this week he gets a tasty matchup where the Cincinnati Bengals went up against Cleveland last week, gave up like 8 tackles to Carson Schwessinger, also gave up 7 tackles to Devin Bush. They both had themselves a healthy game. Foye is the only full-time linebacker, so all of those rushing opportunities are going to go right to Foye and fall in his lap. So I think for much of the year, Foye is probably going to remain on top of the rankings here. So great opportunity for Cincinnati, or for him against Cincinnati. It's going to be a successful offense, be able to push the ball down the field, run the ball plenty. I think Foye is going to find himself plenty of tackle opportunities and some maybe some chances for big plays and coverage. So Foye, number 1. Zaire Franklin against the Denver Broncos this week. Last week he didn't do so well against a pretty poor Miami Dolphins team, but this week Denver's ought to be able to push the ball downfield a lot more. There should be a lot more chances for Zaire Franklin to get back onto the scene. Don't worry about Zaire Franklin. He's still going to be a 10 tackle a game kind of guy. He's pretty much the only full-time linebacker there in Indianapolis. Don't worry about Zaire Franklin. Don't freak out. This is going to be a much better game. He ought to pop back up, get himself some 10 or more tackles. Ernest Jones had an outstanding week last week, where he was getting in on the pass rush as well. Now he plays the Pittsburgh Steelers this week. I think he still builds off that week 1 performance where we saw him go for how many tackles? Let's even see. I don't want to miss. I forget exactly. Don't want to misquote, but yeah, it was 8 tackles. He had an interception, not a sack, but nonetheless, Ernest Jones is a big play guy. If he wasn't going to get a sack, or if he wasn't going to get an interception, it could have very well been a sack. So, love Ernest Jones to build off of that week 1 performance against Pittsburgh Steelers. They ought to run the ball a hefty amount. I know Aaron Rodgers threw the ball 40 or more times last week, but nonetheless, Ernest Jones should be pretty busy. Pittsburgh's always been a heavy rushing team. Arthur Smith just loves to run the ball. Ernest Jones ought to be busy. They played the Jets last week, and I think Quincy Williams and Jamie Sherwood went for 15 or more tackles together. Ernest Jones is pretty much the most dominant Seattle linebacker out there. He's going to gobble up a majority of the tackling opportunities there. So then we've got Jamin Sherwood up against the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills are going to run the ball an ungodly amount of times. They ought to. They played Baltimore last week and threw the ball a bunch, but Baltimore kind of forced their hand that way. The only way you're really going to beat Baltimore is actually ended up being late game comeback. They were forced to pass. So this week, I think that Buffalo should come out pretty handily ahead early in this game. There should be a lot of rushing from the Buffalo side of the ball. I think Jamin Sherwood should, again, end up among the top-end linebackers this week. He comes in at number 4. Roquan Smith up at number 5 against the Cleveland Browns. Last week, the Cleveland Browns played the Cincinnati Bengals, and Demetrius Knight had 10 tackles. Then also Logan Wilson had 8 as well. So a hefty amount of tackles is going to be coming around for Roquan Smith. They have a somewhat weaker defensive line, so there's going to be some more leaked opportunities for rushers to kind of leak into that second layer of the defense, and Roquan Smith to kind of soak those up. Let's see what he put up last week. Bear with me, 10 tackles in his first week, so he's off to a hot start already. So Cleveland is going to run the ball a hefty amount. They always have, but nonetheless, with Joe Flacco at quarterback, more sustained drives, more opportunities for Roquan Smith. But the only caveat being that Baltimore may get ahead early, but the Cleveland defense is pretty stout, so they may keep this team in the game, at least enough for Joe Flacco to kind of make the Baltimore Ravens sweat a little bit. I like Roquan Smith this week. Down Henley at number 6 against the Raiders. The Raiders didn't allow too many tackles last week against the New England Patriots. We saw Bob Spillane get a few, and then we saw Christian Ellis get 8 or 9. So there's only so much to go around there, but Dan Henley is the only full-time linebacker there in Los Angeles for the Chargers. So I think Dan Henley, I know Dan Henley. If you were paying attention last year, he was a good 10 tackle a game kind of guy. Put up a healthy amount last week. Let's actually just see how many did he get on last week specifically. 8 tackles and a sack against Patrick Mahomes. So he's still able to put up good tackles in poor matchups because there wasn't a lot of rushing opportunities to soak up tackles there last week against the Kansas City Chiefs. But he still managed to come out with 8 tackles, even got in the pass rush game. So I think Vegas having a pretty weak offensive line should be more chances for maybe another sack. But either way, they're going to run the shit out of Ashton Jeanty. So Deion Henley is going to be soaking up a lot of Ashton Jeanty this week. And he's a pretty good tackler. He's one of those guys who will just pretty handily stuff the stat sheet each and every week. So feel good about Henley. Quay Walker makes the top 12 this week at number 7 against the Washington Commanders. They're going to run the ball a hefty amount. Jaden Daniels adds to that just for our tackling opportunity. But Quay Walker, when he gets full snaps and he's actually playing in the game, one of those guys who can come out and put up a 10 tackle week in a given week. He can put up as much as 17 to 18 tackles. Last week we saw Edgerrin Cooper go for 14. Quay Walker went for 10. Or let's see specifically. Don't want to quote because I know Quay Walker had more points. Let's see how the tackles broke out. Edgerrin. 9 for Quay Walker, 12 for Edgerrin Cooper, but Quay Walker had a big play thrown in there somewhere to kind of add to his performance last week. But nonetheless, so I think, Edge Cooper might end up getting more tackles throughout the season, but Quay Walker adds a little bit more big play upside. So that's why I've got Quay Walker up here over Edge Cooper. It depends on your league. If you got a tackle-heavy league, you might go for a guy like Edge Cooper instead. But either way, this is going to be a great game. Green Bay and Washington are going to go back and forth all game. Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper are going to be flat-out busy a ton. Now we've got Jordan Brooks here at number 8 against the New England Patriots. Jordan Brooks is a pure tackler kind of guy. We haven't seen a Miami Dolphins linebacker perform consistently in years. Now we've got 2 of them. We've got Tyrell Dodson and Jordan Brooks. Last week, the New England Patriots played the Vegas Raiders. Devin White and Jermaine Pratt combined for 18 tackles. So there's going to be plenty of tackling opportunity for Jordan Brooks and Tyrell Dodson to both feast in this matchup. And I like Jordan Brooks to be the higher performer of the two. Even though he's not wearing the green dot, he's still in the better position to soak up those tackles. New England ought to run the ball plenty. They run a tandem backfield in Henderson and Stevenson. So Jordan Brooks should be plenty busy this week. Now we've got Alex Singleton at number 9. Alex Singleton finally makes the top 12. He gets an outstanding matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, where they're going to run the ball. They ran the ball 35 or more times last week. Alex Singleton only had 6 tackles in what was not a linebacker-friendly matchup. Who was it that the Denver Broncos played? I forget. I know I looked into this stats, and I know that they didn't run the ball a lot. Let's just see specifically. Tennessee. Yeah, Tennessee didn't do a whole lot of anything last week. So there just wasn't much opportunity. I think they ran Tony Pollard 15 times. They only ran the ball total like maybe 20. So it just doesn't leave a lot of meat on the bone. So don't freak out about Alex Singleton's 6 tackles. The fact that it was 6 tackles and not like 2 or 3 is actually pretty encouraging because that's probably going to be one of his more floor type games. Now you get a hefty rushing offense in Indianapolis, and I think Alex Singleton is going to have himself a nice little week here to pop onto the scene for the season. Kind of make himself known and plant himself. I imagine he's not going to leave the top end linebackers. But we'll see. See how he goes this week. Zach Bond at number 10 Philadelphia. He goes up against the Kansas City Chiefs this week. Kind of a middling matchup. It just depends. We saw Diane Henley if we go for a sack, so there might be some pass rush opportunity for a guy like Zach Bond. Of course, he's in the top 10. That might be his best chance because he's a pretty good tackler. He had 9 tackles last season. He would kind of go up and down between like 6'7" to 10, 11. Nothing too flashy, but a guy who's going to put up some big points. He was a top end performer last year. He adds the big play to his hefty tackling floor. So this week against Kansas City, there just might be a limited opportunity. They only ran the ball like less than 20 times last week, so he might have to get in and make some big plays in the passing game and coverage, or maybe rush the quarterback and get back there to Patrick Mahomes. But nonetheless, Zach Bond has more than proved himself as a weekly performer over the course of the last year or so. So Zach Bond, a top 10 linebacker for week 2. Now we've got Edge Cooper, also linebacker for the Green Bay Packers, plays against the Washington Commanders. I don't want to go into too much detail. I just talked about that with Quay Walker. It's going to be a back-and-forth affair. Washington's going to run the ball plenty. They like their Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. They like their Austin Eckler out of the backfield. Jaden Daniels adds to that too. I imagine one of Edge Cooper or Quay Walker will probably be spying on Jaden Daniels much of the game and just kind of be flowing with the flow of the offense. So these guys are good, 2 great tacklers. And the interior defensive line for the Green Bay Packers is now a little bit weaker without Kenny Clark. I think that Green Bay should have. This is going to be a good game. There's going to be a lot of IDP production, especially at the linebacker position here for Green Bay. All right, now to round out the top 12, we've got Tyrell Dodson for the Miami Dolphins against the New England Patriots this week. I mentioned earlier with Jordan Brooks. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this matchup. I've talked about it here off the top, so I think this is a great matchup where New England is actually able to sustain some drives. They got a tandem backfield with two running backs who are going to run the ball 20 or more times. And last week we saw Vegas linebackers get 18 or more tackles in that game. I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity for an actually good linebacking core to soak up more tackles, because I imagine Devin White had missed tackle opportunities. I imagine Jermaine Pratt had missed tackle opportunities. They're just two pretty inefficient tacklers, but can have some pretty spike weeks. So I think Tyrell Dodson and Jordan Brooks ought to have some pretty big days. They ought to be able to continue off of their studly Week 1 performances in Week 2. So, love Tyrell Dodson, love Jordan Brooks. Now let's recap the top 12 linebackers for this week. Foye Oluokun, Zaire Franklin, Ernest Jones, Jamin Sherwood at number 4, Roquan Smith, Henley, Quay Walker, Jordan Brooks at number 8, Alex Singleton, Zach Bond, Edge Cooper, and Tyrell Dodson there at 13. All right, let's run through these defensive backs. I'm not going to go into too great detail. Let's see. I will not advocate for being a top ranker here for defensive backs, but nonetheless, we've got some guys who are pretty good performers that, and it's such a volatile position. It's really hard to pin down. In all honesty, there's so many guys that can finish top 12 every week, but we stick with the guys who are the most consistent. Julian Love, top end tackler, 10 tackles last week, plays against Pittsburgh Steelers. Love him for a hefty dose of rushing while he plays around the line of scrimmage. A lot of tackling opportunity for defense backs. Kyle Hamilton at number 2 plays against the Cleveland Browns. Again, around the box, he's a big play kind of guy. It's going to be a pretty back and forth affair, I would imagine, but Baltimore could get out early. Just a matter of whether that Cleveland defense can kind of keep them in it. But Kyle Hamilton's a big play kind of guy. 9 tackles last week, had a big play. One of the top end performers. So I think that he's going to be heavily involved here in this matchup. Cleveland's actually a pretty decent offense under Joe Flacco, so there should be some success, some plays. There's not going to be a whole lot of 3 and outs, I imagine. Budda Baker at number 3 against the Carolina Panthers. Panthers didn't look that great last week, but Budda Baker hasn't really mattered with matchups. He manages to get his tackles no matter how. And you'll notice that in the top 12, all of these guys are going to be guys that play around the line of scrimmage. I will continue to say that Travis Hunter should be the number 1 defensive back if you have an IDP league that scores for offensive points. This is just going to bring a hefty floor that you're not going to get from a whole lot of guys. But no less, Budda Baker against Carolina Panthers. There should be plenty of tackling opportunity. They're going to run the ball plenty. Budda Baker plays around the line of scrimmage. Again, I mentioned all of these guys are going to play around the line of scrimmage a pretty hefty amount, so run-heavy matchups are going to favor them. Pass-friendly matchups, not so much, but they're still going to be in coverage, so they're just kind of all around the field. These kind of guys are guys that are going to be wherever the play is happening. So big plays in coverage, big plays in the pass rush, a lot of tackle opportunities. Most of them do have good tackle floors. Brian Branch against he doesn't play Detroit this week. Who does he play this week? I'd have to go look. Let's see. Brian Branch plays sorry guys, I had Detroit in there, plays the Chicago Bears this week. Again, another team that's going to be able to sustain drives. Brian Branch is among the top defensive back performers week in and week out. I think last week he had a little bit of an underwhelming performance with just 5 tackles, but that's a pretty good floor in a poor matchup, so I like him this week against the Chicago Bears. Now we've got Derman James at number 5 against the Vegas Raiders, a team that's going to, again, sustain drives. Derman James is a guy who's going to get you about 6 to 8 tackles a week. A lot of these guys these top-end performers are a lot of the same. There are a lot of great tacklers playing around the line of scrimmage who are in the more favorable matchups. They're going to end up being some of your top-end performers throughout the year. Derwin James is no slouch. I think he was a top 15 safety last week. So this week against the Vegas Raiders, I expect no less. Number 6 on the defensive back rankings, we've got Jordan Battle, safety for Cincinnati Bengals, playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars in Week 2. Last week, the Jacksonville Jaguars gave up 11 tackles to safety Trayvon Moerig of the Carolina Panthers. 7 of those were solo. So we already know the safety position is in good hands here in a Jacksonville matchup. Then you add on the fact that Jordan Battle had 12 tackles of his own last week against the Cleveland Browns in what it should be a pretty similar matchup. Jacksonville's going to be able to push the ball downfield. They'll be able to sustain drives. There'll be plenty of opportunity. It's not like there's going to be a lot of 3 and outs. Jordan Battle should be pretty damn busy. I know Travis Etienne ran 16 times, and Trevor Lawrence threw for 30 or 40. So Jordan Battle already has displayed a high tackle floor. Or a high tackle ceiling, at least at this point. We've seen Jacksonville give up double-digit tackles to the position already this year. I like him for this matchup here against Jacksonville. Now we've got Tykee Smith at number 7. We've got two pairs of players from the same team here in the top 12 here. Kind of like the linebackers, but we've got Tykee Smith coming in at 7 against the Houston Texans, plays for the strong safety for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who plays kind of all over the field. He'll drop into coverage, play around the line of scrimmage, rush the passer. He kind of does it all. And last week, we saw Tykee Smith have himself a nice little week with 11 tackles in Week 1 against the Atlanta Falcons. I think we're going to see a lot of the same for much of the season from Tykee. He was a guy who last year was regularly putting up between 6 and 11, 6 to 10 tackle games. Granted, he had a little bit of an injury, had injury woes kind of a little bit last year, but nonetheless, he was pretty good, steady defensive back for you, and he's in the same kind of role, going to play a hefty amount of box snaps. So there's just plenty of tackling opportunity for a guy like Tykee Smith. And then you talk about next on the list, Antoine Winfield, a guy who's been the number 1 overall DB and a top 10 or so overall performer in IDP before. Last week against Atlanta, Antoine Winfield didn't quite have the kind of tackling floor we were hoping for in this matchup, but he's not a guy who, if he has any down weeks, it's not going to last for very long. Antoine is pretty well entrenched himself with upper 80, 90 tackle floor over the course of an entire season. But he also, he brings that big tackle floor, and then he also adds plenty of big play upside, where much of his career he's pretty well set a floor of 2 or more tackles, forced fumbles, interceptions. A year doesn't go by where he plays a full season and doesn't have a handful of just like it. You just go look at the box score. He stuffs the stat sheet week in and week out. So 6 sacks last year or a couple of years ago, in 2023 with his career year, where he had 122 tackles. Antoine Winfield is one of the league's best. So make no mistake, that 4-tackle game last week, even on 74 snaps, was not going to be the norm. So I think Antoine Winfield can get back to it here in a matchup against did I say Jacksonville Jaguars? No, that was Jordan Battle against the Texans. Number 9, I mentioned him earlier, Trayvon Moerig, played the Jacksonville Jaguars last week, came up with 11 tackles, 7 of which were solo. This week he gets the Arizona Cardinals, a team who's already given up. Let's just see what they gave up last week to the Saints. Nelson Adebo had himself a nice game last week where, it was Julian Blackmon, 7 tackles in the matchup last week. Sorry, guys, just had to refresh there. But no, Trayvon Moerig before, it was kind of the IDP community didn't really know how to value Moerig with this change over to Carolina. We knew that Carolina's defensive back room needed help, but we didn't know how Trayvon Moerig was going to be utilized. It appears that he's going to be just how we like him, right around the line of scrimmage, and he's going to be a high tackle floor for much of the season. So we're glad to see him start off with 11 tackles in his first week. And now against the Arizona Cardinals, I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity for him as well in week 2. Trayvon Moerig is going to be a high tackle floor guy. These guys are all going to remain in the top 25-ish scorers week in and week out. because even though I get down to some cornerback here in just a second, we'll talk a little bit about his consistency. Now we get to number 10, Isaiah Palamau, formerly Trayvon Moerig's teammate here in Las Vegas. He plays the LA Chargers. Isaiah Palamau had a pretty nice game last week where he came away with 7 tackles and even snagged an interception against the New England Patriots in week 1. Now he's going to get a lot of opportunity for, much of the same. LA Chargers are going to throw the ball plenty. He's going to drop into coverage. Big play opportunities in terms of pass deflections. He's the guy who's going to get pass deflections here and there. Comes up with some interceptions as well. The fact that he's starting off hot already in the interception department is nice, but I'm not going to rely on that. More like a pass deflection kind of guy and bring you a high tackle floor. Where last year it was pretty regular. He was getting 6 to 8 tackles in a game. He might dip down to 3, but he'd bring it right back, 2 or 3, but he'd bring it right back up the following week. So a pretty consistent tackler week in and week out, and plays the Chargers this week, who should have a healthy dose of offense. And he should get another 60, 70 snap game. And in any game where he's getting 60, 70 snaps, Isaiah Palamau is going to be a consistent producer for you guys. So I like him here at number 9 or 10. Now we've got Kenny Moore, the second here. We'll just do both Indianapolis Colts defensive backs here to round out the top 12. Kenny Moore second, and Nick Cross. Both of the Indianapolis Colts play the Denver Broncos this week. And Kenny Moore is a cornerback, considering the fact that Bo Nix was throwing the ball 46 times last week. I'm not going to say he's going to throw another 40 or 50 times, but you can expect a good 35 plus pass attempts. Kenny Moore, being a cornerback, going to guard one of the 2 top wide receivers. He ought to get plenty of opportunities for tackles. You're looking, if you split those pass attempts from last week, 46 by the 2 cornerbacks, there's 23 tackle opportunities right there, just chasing wide receivers. So Kenny Moore is one of the best. Go follow Johnny the Greek for some DB streamers. He knows his stuff with DB, 70% hit rate. Kenny Moore is one of his top guys week in and week out every year. I love this matchup, especially a Sean Payton-led offense should sustain drives. Nick Cross, again, a pure tackler, a guy who is going to be getting you consistently 6 to 8 or more tackles a game. Already had 6 tackles and gets involved in the pass rush as well. Last year we saw him do much of the same, but he was actually getting more like 8, 10 plus tackles a game. So as a defensive back, Nick Cross is the epitome of a pure tackler for getting linebacker type numbers. He's putting up better numbers than a handful of linebackers over the course of the entire season. And he's starting off pretty hot this year, getting more involved in the pass rush. So I like Nick Cross to maybe get back there and put a little pressure on Bo Nix this week or something like that. Kenny Moore also got a sack last week too, so he can get involved in some blitz schemes. So blitz packages, excuse me. Words are hard. But yeah, no less, the Indianapolis Colts defense backs ought to be great. They have historically been, because a lot kind of leaks through into that secondary, and they all kind of intermingle in and around the line of scrimmage. So Nick Cross and Kenny Moore ought to have some solid weeks this week. So let's recap everything real quick. Defensive linemen 1 through 12. TJ Watt, Brian Burns, Jared Verse, Max Crosby, Myles Garrett, Josh Hines-Allen, Michael Parsons, Nick Benito, Alex Highsmith, Nick Bosa, Byron Young, Harold Landry. Linebackers Foye Oluokun, Zaire Franklin, Ernest Jones, Jamin Sherwood, Roquan Smith, Deion Henley, Quay Walker, Jordan Brooks, Alex Singleton, Zach Bond, Edge Cooper, and Tyrell Dodson. Then we go to the defensive backs, Julian Love, Kyle Hamilton, Budda Baker at 3, Brian Branch, Derman James, Jordan Battle, Tykee Smith, Antoine Winfield, Trayvon Moerig, Isaiah Palamau, Kenny Moore, and Nick Cross rounds out the defensive back rankings for week 2. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you'll stick around. There should be more improvements coming in the coming weeks. We've got some data to kind of collect and analyze now, and we'll have some averages and whatnot to kind of throw out there for you guys. But if you like what you see, throw down a comment, throw down a like, and rock with us the rest of the season. Check out the rest of the channel for your fantasy football needs. And thanks again. And we'll see you back here. Good luck in week 2. We'll see you back next week for week 3 rankings. So good luck out there this week.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.